The influx of cartel drugs in Montana is nothing short of staggering. Fentanyl use and just our law enforcement fentanyl seizures in Montana in the last 4 years have increased 20,000%.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today, Attorney General of Montana, Austin Knudsen. How's it going?
Good. It's actually Knudsen.
Knudsen. Man, that's too many syllables. Knudsen. That's three. I think I can figure it out, though. So before we get into all the stuff we're going to talk about today, let's talk about you for a bit. Where are you from originally?
I'm a Montana native. I'm from probably the most rural part of America, let alone Montana, extreme northeast Montana. So up by Canada, North Dakota, little itty bitty farming town called Bainville.
What's up there? Farms?
Farms, nothing.
and the border, I suppose.
The border, North Dakota, no, a lot of farming. That's the farming and ranching. That's what I grew up doing. That's pretty much all that's going on up there. A little bit of oil activity once in a while, but pretty quiet up there.
And your does your family still own a ranch or farm up there?
Yeah, yep, still in the family. I don't know what generation we're on at this point, but yeah, my folks are still there, still running it. Wasn't quite enough there for all of us, so I went to law school, and here we are.
And you, I think I read that you're of Danish ancestry. Is that correct?
Lots of Dane, yeah. That whole valley up there's an area in northeastern Montana where a lot of Scandinavian immigrants ended up getting off the train when they came to the country. So yeah, I got Dane on about 3 different sides.
I mean, it's kind of that whole swath of the country. It's Scandinavian or German, right? For the most part, like the Dakotas are a lot of, well, at least North Dakota's a lot of Germans. Minnesota's a lot of Scandinavians and Germans.
Yeah, exact same. It's about 3/4 Danish. The other quarter is German, and then there's some Indian sprinkled in there, and there's all kinds. Not like everyone else.
How is the native population up there? I mean, I struggle to even call them native because we're all kind of native at this point, in my opinion. But I always like that Teddy Roosevelt comment that there's no room in America for hyphenated Americanism. I like that. I like because. And I'm wondering about somebody who's in a state with a large res population. They go through a lot of struggles up there. I mean, especially with policing, right? Something that you're intimately involved in. At any given time, there are, depending on which res you're talking about, not just Montana, but North Dakota, South Dakota, all over the place. There's like missing women everywhere and stuff like that. And it's a difficult situation because state police and the federal government can't really get involved. It has to be res police, right, for the most part, because of the way things are jurisdiction there. So what's it like in Montana? Is that still a big problem for you guys?
Yeah, look, I'm a former prosecutor from a tribal county. My home county is about 3/4 reservation. It's the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. It's the Assiniboine and Sioux tribes, which I'm a descendant. It's tough. It's really tough. We see a huge drug problem, primarily methamphetamine, but in the last 4 years, I mean, just like everywhere else, fentanyl has come on just in huge quantities, huge levels. It's difficult because you're dealing with an area that's incredibly rural. The feds have primary jurisdiction. Well, they don't want to come up there. It's 300 miles to the nearest major airport. They don't like driving up there either. So usually they don't, which means jurisdiction then goes to the tribe. But under federal law in the tribal system, doesn't matter if you commit a murder. I mean, the largest sentence any tribe in this country can levy within their own systems is 3 years. And so it's frustrating for me because, as a former county attorney, which is what we call them in Montana, we don't have district attorneys, we have county attorneys. But you're still a subdivision of the state, and the state at no time has any criminal jurisdiction on the reservations if you're dealing with tribal individuals. I mean, it doesn't exist. So even if I see it, which I very often did, driving into our county seat, which was located on the reservation. I mean, you saw rampant drug use, you saw a lot of crime, you saw a lot of transient activity. Even if we saw it, there was not a lot we could do about it. I mean, we could notify tribal police. That was about it.
So is there any solution to that? Because it seems to be, and it isn't just tribal areas. It seems to be an issue anytime some group of folks or another don't feel part of what's going on in their country, whether they feel ostracized or disenfranchised. They tend to create a parallel economy. They tend to become nihilistic about being part of whatever community or country they're in. And then their culture ultimately breaks down over time. We've seen it. It's like with many groups, right? Some people have become successful, but this is stuff that Italian and Irish immigrants face. This is stuff that quite a few new people to the country or people that were already here have faced before. I'm just not sure, from the outside looking in, what any kind of way to deal with that is, to be honest.
Well, the way you deal with it, this is a problem that gets laid directly at the federal government. I mean, the dependence on federal government is what has largely destroyed tribal communities. And I'll say that as someone who grew up in it. I mean, I grew up in the Indian Health Service. I've got family that still work for BIA. My mom worked for BIA for a long time within the federal government. It's dependence. I think you'd see this whether it was on an Indian reservation in rural Montana or whether it's in the inner cities. I think it's a lot of the same thing. You've got people who have become largely dependent. You've got rampant homelessness. You've got rampant hopelessness, and I think that's the real issue. There's very little hope on a reservation. There's 75% teenage pregnancy rate. You've got a life expectancy, maybe in the 50s, depending on what reservation you're on. There's just not a lot to look forward to. And so, what else have you got to do than start drinking or get into drugs? We've seen the cartels, Mexican drug cartels, move into our reservations in Montana in staggering levels. Part of that is because there's a demand for the product, but part of that's also what we talked about earlier, which is the legal jurisdictional issues. I mean, the Mexican cartels aren't stupid, and they know there's a layer of jurisdictional issues there that the state of Montana can't get to, and they can conduct business on the Indian reservations with some impunity. So, I mean, you've got a lot going on there, but the way you fix this is at the federal level. The federal government is the one holding the purse strings, and they're the ones that are holding the tribes back. I mean, that the Major Crimes Act, that's the federal legislation I was talking about, that tribal courts, tribal law enforcement system is within their own sovereign systems. The largest sentence they can levy for any crime is 3 years. So, well, when you get the feds that pass on a murder and the tribe steps in and prosecutes that, the largest sentence they can levy for a murder is 3 years. And I'm not being facetious. I have literally seen that on my own reservation back home. So, I mean, this is a problem the feds can solve, but, they seem to like to talk about it. That's about it.
Do you think it's just garden variety incompetence? I mean, Hanlon's razor says don't apply malice where competence will suffice. And I just think that, one, I think that no form of government scales indefinitely. That's why the idea of federalism is so brilliant from our founders. You know what I mean? The idea that people are managed best locally and not by some central authority. The larger we grow, the more it makes sense, but the less we use it in application, which is kind of stupid, to be honest. But yeah, what do you think that is? You think it's just incompetence?
I think it's power. I mean, I think that's what it comes down to in most of these instances. You've got a large voting block. I mean, just to be completely honest, I think that's really what it is from the federal level. The Indian reservations tend to vote en masse. They vote liberal. They vote Democrat. And so what the Democrats do is they tend to promise more to the tribes in order to keep that voting block in place. And it's effective. I mean, we've got a U.S. senator right now sitting in office in Montana, in Washington, D.C., largely because a lot of times the tribal vote comes out for him, which doesn't make a ton of sense to me a lot of times. But I think that's really what it comes down to. This is power politics.
Well, you're talking about John Tester. Luckily for us, I don't think he's going to be a U.S. senator very much longer because it looks like our boy's going to wipe his ass out, which is nice. The last polling I saw, he was way up by 10 points. So not that you should trust any political polls. They're never accurate, right? But he's a much better candidate. Yeah, but that makes sense. I mean, that's kind of what federal politicians have done with the black community for the last, what, let's call it 60 years, right? Since the middle part of the 20th century, is pander to the community, never actually help them, right? Like you give them enough to keep their heads above water, but never the opportunity to achieve a generational upward mobility. So you have them under your thumb forever, right? I mean, I can't think of anything more sinister than that as a political strategy. Um, and I think,
Well, I mean,
I mean, it's best encapsulated by LBJ's comments in the 1960s, where he said, "I'll have these N words voting Democrat for 100 years." That's a literal quote from him. If you don't believe it, go look it up. It's in the White House transcripts.
no, I've heard it. Yeah, I've been to the LBJ library and I've heard those recordings myself. Look, I'll go a little later in history. I mean, I quote Russell Means, who definitely didn't share my political persuasion, but he was an Indian activist from not very far away from where I'm from. But you might remember him from the movie Last of the Mohicans.
Mm.
He was in that movie, but he was a very big Indian activist. He said it perfectly. If you want to see what communism and socialism looks like, go visit an Indian reservation. I mean, that's what you've got. You've got a large amount of just equal despair. Um, it's pretty tough to get out of that lifestyle and out of that life. And yeah, I do lay that blame right at the feet of the federal government. They could fix a lot of these things. They just choose not to.
Yeah, yeah. He Means ended up becoming very libertarian as he got older, which is very interesting. I mean, I think that anybody exposed to enough uh, uh, Marxism, regardless of what form it takes, will eventually probably become libertarian and probably not even Republican. They will go so far to the other side that they just can't deal with any government control anymore. I mean, that's what happened with Ayn Rand, right? If you read her writings, you can tell like some of it is a bit unreasonable, frankly. It's like, all right, like let's not throw the entire thing out. We have to. There's got to be something here. But I understand it too, right? Like it makes sense to me that somebody that's been abused and then disabused of their own autonomy so much would be like, you know what, no more, right? I would prefer, well, a dangerous liberty, right? As Thomas Jefferson said. So let's get back to you. Grew up on a farm. What happened next? You said, did you have like an older brother that decided to manage the ranch or something, or what happened there?
No, I'm the big brother. No, I mean what happened was I went to college at Montana State University, met my wife. We got married right before we graduated college. But then we got married and graduated and we moved home. We went back to the farm. That was the plan. I was going to farm and ranch with my dad and my family. And after about a year and a half of doing that, I mean, we had to sit down with a calculator and a pencil and just figure out that it didn't work. We don't have a big place, and there just wasn't enough there with commodity prices at that time and the price of equipment and fertilizer and fuel and just everything. There just wasn't enough there. So what happened next is I had about a 2 week window in which I decided to sit for the LSAT and apply to law school. And damned if they didn't take me and let me in. So that's, and it happened about that fast. So I ended up going to the University of Montana Law School. It's the only law school in Montana, located in Missoula.
Is that right? It's the only one?
It's the only one. Yep. And I had made the decision, like my wife and I both, if I couldn't go to law school in state, then I wasn't going to go.
Okay.
But got lucky and they let the token farm kid in, and here we are.
And you got into politics, I would say, relatively young, right? I think you started in 2011. How old were you at the time?
I think I was 28 or 29, somewhere right in there. Yeah, so I had just recently graduated from law school. Again, moved back home to the northeastern Montana area. I'd started working at a small local law firm, just kind of doing soup to nuts, small town lawyering. And within a couple of months, I got asked and recruited pretty heavily to run for the state legislature, specifically our state House of Representatives.
Sure.
So, yeah, that was, I ran in 2010, got elected in 2010, served my first session in the Montana legislature in 2011. So yeah, I mean, at that time I was proud and 30.
And then by your mid 30s, you're the Speaker of the House in the Montana State Legislature. How did that come to be?
Well, it came to be because of term limits. I mean, our citizens in Montana passed legislative term limits in 1991. They're very abrupt. They're very short. Basically, you get 4 terms in the House and 4 terms in the Senate. And so what you end up with is, I mean, we consider it like freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Usually, what you've got is a senior representative in their 4th term who gets elected Speaker of the House. Um, I got elected the number 2 position, which is the Speaker pro tem in my sophomore session, which was kind of strange. But I ended up getting that. And then my junior session, I got elected Speaker of the House. And I don't know. I mean, people tell me I'm the youngest speaker in Montana history. Maybe that's true. I mean, the way I looked at it is whenever someone told me how great that was, I think at the time I was 32 or 33. They go, "Oh, wow, it's amazing. You're 33 and you're the Speaker of the House." And my answer was always, "I'm 33 and I'm the Speaker of the House. That should terrify you." I haven't been around that long. I haven't paid taxes that long. I haven't been in the workforce that long. This is not, I think, what the citizens of Montana envisioned when they passed term limits, but that's how it ended up working out. So yeah, I actually ended up serving 2 sessions as Speaker of the House, which they tell me hasn't happened since term limits passed in 91, but I don't know. I never went back and did the research.
And what made you decide to run for, was it term limits again to run for Attorney General, or that's just a job that appealed to you, I suppose?
I wouldn't say it appealed to me. I mean, honestly, I termed out of the House, and I was trying to build my law practice back up. I mean, it was tough being a solo practice lawyer while also being in the Montana legislature, because our legislature meets every other year and it meets for 90 business days. So you end up having to basically leave your home and your job for about 5 months every other year. And when you're a sole practicing lawyer like I was, I had 3 young kids at home. It was tough. I ended up losing a lot of my business for that, 5, 6 months you take off. So I was trying to build my practice back up, frankly. And then our crime problem back home in Roosevelt County, where I'm from, was getting pretty out of control. We were right next to the Bakken oil field in North Dakota, which was bringing in a lot of problems because it was kind of like the gold rush, kind of the Wild West. And we're right next door to that in Montana. And then you add in the Indian reservation into that formula, and it created a lot of crime, a lot of drugs. And I finally got mad, frankly. I ran for county attorney. That's what I did next. That's our county elected prosecutor. At the time, we had a county attorney who'd been there for 100 years and was elderly and when wasn't doing the job and just plea bargaining everything out. And we were paying for it. I mean, my little hometown of about 700 people, we had a drive-by shooting past my kids' school in broad daylight, and it was 2 drug dealers. So that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and I ran for county prosecutor. And I'd say that's what led me to want to run for AG. You fast forward a couple of years, I knew all the other candidates who were running for AG, and they were all talking about how great things were, about how wonderful things were in Montana, and we got all these big tobacco settlements, and they're trying to run on civil suits, and I'm just like, we got a drug problem here. We got a crime problem in the state. Crime had been rapidly increasing in the state over the last decade, and just nobody was talking about it. Let alone had worked with law enforcement like I had. So that's really what led me to look at and then ultimately run for AG.
Sure. And then in addition to the stuff that's going on locally in Montana, locally is kind of an interesting word to say because it's such a big ass state, but in addition to the stuff that's going on locally there in Montana that you're dealing with, you are one of a few attorneys general in the country that are using in my opinion, the state attorney general's job is twofold. One is to manage the Department of Justice in that state, or the justice rather in that state to some degree. And then is to represent the state at the federal level as well, right? Which is to say, when the federal government gets out of hand, somebody with standing and expertise has to file lawsuits against the federal government. It, I mean, good luck trying to file a class action suit. Good luck trying to find a bunch of aggrieved parties, get them all together, agree on the language, and go file a suit somewhere, right? That's not going to happen. It very rarely happens. Every now and again, you'll see lawsuits against one of the agencies or OSHA or something like that move forward without involvement of one of the AGs, but it's very rare, and it's very rarely successful as well, because one, standing issues, and then two, financing it's very expensive to conduct a lawsuit. So yourself and Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey are two of the best in the country at doing this, in my opinion. Now, you've got a couple going on right now, but tell me about some of the legal challenges, or are some of the legal issues you're seeing at the federal level that your office has gotten involved with, because I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate that question. Yeah, it's certainly true that it's the state AG's job, and I view it as one of my top jobs, is to protect the rights of Montanans. And a lot of times, especially as a flyover state, and especially as a rural flyover state, you get regulations that come out of various agencies in Washington, D.C. that seem to be pretty directed and targeted at us and our way of life. When I took over the office, my predecessor, I mean, for whatever reasons, like that we were a backbencher state. I mean, we didn't file big lawsuits. Montana did not poke the federal bear. We just didn't do it. There just wasn't an appetite for it. And I made it very clear when I took office that we were gonna punch back, and we were gonna punch back pretty hard and be aggressive. So yeah, I mean, I'm in my coming into my fourth year. I'm up for reelection, but we're well over 50 lawsuits against the Biden-Harris administration at this point. I say Biden-Harris because I'm really not sure who's been steering that ship for the last couple
Neither
of
are
years.
they, to be fair, right? They have no idea what's going on either.
Right. So yeah, we're over 50 lawsuits. I mean, that wasn't a number we were trying to get to. I mean, it was happenstance. I mean, there were so many of these rules coming out of the agencies, whether it was the EPA or clean air or anti-coal, clean water, and anti-farm and ranch, Second Amendment stuff. I mean, I'm a big 2A guy. I'm a shooter. I'm a competitive shooter. I'm a reloader. Like, that's a big one to me. That's an area that I pay really close attention to in the ATF. And some of the stuff they were doing was, progressive panaceas that they've been trying to get through Congress for 30 years. And they can't get it done because the votes aren't there. So they just decide, oh, well, we'll put in Steve Dettelbach and he'll do it via rule. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. We have a legislative process in the federal government for a reason, and you still have to follow it. So, yeah, it's just been stuff like that. And that, we're a small office. I don't have a big staff of lawyers. Frankly, I'm always looking for conservative lawyers to come and help us out. We're always shorthanded. But the small staff that I do have, I mean, man, we outkick our coverage. We outpunch our weight class. We've had some big wins at the U.S. Supreme Court, ranging from COVID to, like I said, Waters of the U.S., Clean Air Act, Second Amendment stuff. We've done a lot of really good work, and we're going to keep doing it as long as I'm in office.
Now, I want to talk about Chevron. One of the biggest issues, if anybody that follows politics or economic policy in the United States should agree that one of the biggest downturns in the U.S. economy over the last 3.5 years has been subverting our energy independence for whatever fucking reason we decided to do that. I mean, you can speculate if you'd like. I don't think it's really helpful to speculate. All I know is that there's been a willful deterioration of our energy independence. Let's leave it there. So a lot of it has been done either by edict from the president or by rulings, as you mentioned, by unelected bureaucrats and agencies. Now, for those in the audience who don't understand this, one, talk about the energy production in Montana and then how that negative nonsense from agencies affected it, and then how the Chevron case has now, it's not over by any stretch. This fight is not over by any stretch of the imagination, but how now the courts have a precedent to say, you know what, no, you can't. And by the way, it's like the fourth one of these decisions in the last 5 years. I think the first, well, 4 years. One was the OSHA decision about vaccine mandates, bump stocks, pistol brace rules, so two for the ATF, and then now Chevron. Explain to people what exactly is going on there and how this new case, the Chevron case, changes that.
Yeah, so it's the doctrine of it's called Chevron deference, and this goes back to actually to the Reagan administration, believe it or not. The Reagan administration put out a lot of regulations, and just like today, I mean, a lot of those regulations got challenged. Well, what happened when those things got challenged? The U.S. Supreme Court came up with this doctrine called the Chevron doctrine, Chevron deference. And boiled down, it just said, well, we as the courts, we as the Supreme Court are going to give deference to federal agencies when they make rules like this. We are going to assume that they know what they're doing and that they are the subject matter experts. Like, boiled down, that's what it is. So you were starting off at Jump Street with the court already weighing the scales in favor of the federal agencies when they promulgate any kind of rule, no matter how onerous. We've swung far away from that now, and I think correctly. I mean, that has led to just all kinds of just out of control, outrageous, multi-hundred-page rules coming out of these federal agencies. I mean, but put this in perspective. On a good year, the federal Congress passes 100 laws that actually go through the House, go through the Senate, get passed by both, and make it to the president's desk for signature. 100. Now, you look at the Code of Federal Regulations every year and how many rules, proposed rules, final rules that the federal agencies put out every year. And it's massive. I mean, it's in the thousands. And that really, it's become a fourth branch of government, the administrative state. So in the last couple of years, and really since the Trump court, right? Like since some of the justices that Donald Trump put on the U.S. Supreme Court, they've taken a very dim view of these agencies passing these gigantic, sweeping, policy-changing rules, right? The agency's job is to implement rules that execute the laws passed by Congress. The agency's role is not to drive public policy and change public policy by passing a rule. That was never the founders' intent. And so we really are now getting back to this, like as you said, but with the last several years, last 4 years, the U.S. Supreme Court has been slowly chipping away at Chevron deference. And as they've been doing it, they've been warning these federal agencies, right? Like, you need to rein it in. You need to stop trying to go so far with these sweeping rule changes. And under this administration, they're just, basically been giving flip the bird until finally the court in this last case just completely said, all right, you know what? No more Chevron deference. Chevron is dead. There is now no more deference given to federal agencies. We're going to review these things out in the open, wide open, and we're not going to assume that you as the agency know what you're doing.
So now, I mean, look, the point to this is that the administration and Congress, who's actually supposed to be in charge of this, is still well within their rights to seek the counsel of so-called experts, right? Should they actually be experts and not just puppets or whatever. But the onus to prove that what you're doing is still on you as a legislator or an administration. You don't just get to say, trust me, bro, and then pass something that people didn't vote on. It's not how it works here. And there's a lot of there's been a lot of additional cases that were involved in this. I think some of them got ruled actually before this got struck down. One of them was the cross-state air pollution rule. But there's been, and then some of the coal rules as well have been adjudicated in favor of normal people, I guess, if you want to call it that. But the fight now has only begun, right? Because we've created the case law now. Now we're in the adjudication phase, right? Which is like they're going to keep trying to do this, and laws should be immediately struck down at the lower court level. Should they not rise to the level of the or should they try to use Chevron deference to get away with doing this stuff without actually having the legislature vote on it. And that's another thing I wanted to ask you about. Excuse me. There have been a couple of cases, particularly regarding the Second Amendment. One's the Bruin case, and then there's a couple of other ones as well. But they are not being taken into consideration at the lower court level. Any of the left leaning courts, the federal appeals courts across the country that just don't agree with gun ownership for some reason or another, completely ignore SCOTUS's rulings on this stuff, time and time again. What exactly should be, or even is, the penalty for something like that? Like, I mean, that seems like if the Supreme Court rules that private gun ownership is a right, that owning weapons and having them in your home is a right. We don't permit rights, right? So that permitting process should go away, and then lower federal courts upholding that. Why is there no like impeachment process for these people? They should be kicked out of office and disbarred for that. You're ignoring the higher court's ruling.
Well, I mean, you're right. The ultimate remedy is you get appealed up to the Supreme Court again and slapped down, and that's what's going to happen. But look, there's also the political implication here. Look at what's happening in those far left blue states where you have courts doing that. And I'm looking at California, I'm looking at Hawaii, I'm looking at several of the East Coast states. What's happening? People are leaving. People are coming to states like Montana. We just picked up a second congressional seat. We've had one congressman for most of my life because our population was so low. Well, now since COVID and because all these left-leaning judges and left-leaning legislatures in these states, we're seeing a flood of, near as I can tell, conservative refugees leaving those states and coming to states like Montana. So I to your question, I think there is a real political consequence there for these states that are doing that. But look, I'll look at like the Hawaii Supreme Court, right? Now you were talking about federal court, but let's take it even lower, like to a state court. You got the Hawaii Supreme Court that has recently ruled that, well, yeah, the Bruin decision and yeah, Heller, but this is the Aloha state. And in our historic record, you know, and with our special state constitution that's not like anybody else's, we just don't see a right to self-defense. Well, that's utter nonsense. Hawaii's state constitution isn't special. It's largely mirrored after several other state constitutions, particularly in the Western U.S. They're not an old state. They're one of the newest states. But you've got a state Supreme Court that is so beholden to left liberal politics that they're going to issue a crazy ruling like this. And all that's going to happen is they're going to go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. They're going to get slapped down. They're going to get dragged into this kicking and screaming. But yeah, I mean, you've got state legislators, you've got state elected district court judges, and unfortunately, in some cases, some appointed federal judges that are just ignoring Heller. They're ignoring Bruin. You know, the ones that concern me is when you see local city government, like municipal government, trying to weasel around the Bruin decision, right? Bruin said you had to have a historical analog for whatever kind of gun control you're attempting to do. And the only examples the Supreme Court gave were polling places and in federal government buildings. Those are the only places that the Supreme Court said you could get away with restricting the Second Amendment, because historically we've done so in this country. So it's really, really, A, fascinating, B, incredibly frustrating to watch these local governments try to shoehorn in, you know, whatever crazy gun control they're trying to pass, and by saying that there's a historical analog for it. And that's exactly what Hawaii did, by the way, in that ruling. But I mean, the remedy is they're going to get slapped down, and they're going to lose power. They're going to lose votes in the Congress, and it's going to keep coming to states like Montana.
Do you think? I mean, I've seen that quite a bit. States in the Northeast and California, they've definitely seen mass exits. What about? I don't know if Hawaii has or not. I don't know if a lot of people are going to leave Hawaii, to be honest. But in most states, that's probably true. But Hawaii is they are based on tourism, right? So I don't know if that affects them. Like their entire economy is tourism. They don't produce anything. So I think there's things that the federal government could do should they choose to make that less profitable for them if they don't fall into line with the Constitution, for example, or they can just choose to not be a state anymore. I'm perfectly fine with that. If there's a big enough group of people in a state that don't want to be part of America anymore, then fuck off, right? Like I'm not terribly romantic about the idea of 50. It could be 49. It could be 60 for all I care. If there's other places that want to join up, and the again back to Roosevelt, there's no room in America for hyphenated Americanism. Immigration has worked so well for the United States historically because people came here from a bad place and was like, you know what? Forget all that crap. I'm gonna become American, right? That's who I am now. I'm an American, and you can see this in first generation Americans all the way up through, really up through the late '90s, and it started to change once we were like, hey, you know what? Everybody just come over, and you can, you know, you can do nothing to become American. Like I'm pretty sure that, and when I say pretty sure, I know for an absolute fact because I worked at immigration, that when you naturalize as a citizen, you say you don't have allegiances to anybody else, right? That's part of it. And when I see people that are immigrants like waving Palestinian flags and protesting and stuff like that, like, look, you're welcome to believe whatever you want to believe, practice your religion. If you've got a particular style of politics you like, go for it, bud. But what you're not allowed to do is provide aid and comfort to the enemy. And Palestine is adversarial to the United States, as is their parent company, Iran, right? So to me, that isn't necessarily protected speech, especially if you're, what can be granted can be taken away. And I think we need to start some deportation. I wonder from your perspective, though, let's forget about that particular issue. I want to talk about the massive influx of illegal immigrants over the past 3.5 years. What the hell can we even do about that?
Well, the southern border's got to get secure, and that's not going to happen until you've got an administration, a presidency in place that takes that seriously. Because here again, I just distill this down to the 30,000-foot view. This is all about power. This is about votes. The Democrats know that every vote that they can try to smuggle in across the southern border is going to vote for them, because they're going to give them amnesty. They're going to give them health care. They're going to give them a debit card. They're going to give them cell phones. I mean, this is just not long division. They're trying to buy votes at the expense of our national security and at the expense of our communities. I don't throw that around lightly. I mean, I'm here to tell you, Montana, we're a hell of a long way from the southern border. We are absolutely a border state. The influx of cartel drugs in Montana is nothing short of staggering. Fentanyl use and just our law enforcement fentanyl seizures in Montana in the last 4 years have increased 20,000%. And that's not a typo. Like that, I know exactly what I said there. That's what we're seeing here. We are routinely interdicting foreign nationals who are in this state who are trafficking drugs, and not small amounts of them. Huge amounts of fentanyl. I mean, the seizures this year, we're already on track to shatter last year's record, and last year was just a staggering record for fentanyl seizures. So, like that's the perspective that I really have on the southern border. Like that's how Montana is paying for it. People have asked me, why is Montana involved in so many of these border security lawsuits against the Biden administration? That's why. Because I mean, our communities are just absolutely being devastated by this. Our fentanyl overdose deaths are up 2,000% in just a couple of years here. I mean, this is little old Montana. We don't deal with those issues here, but we are. So, I mean, I've been down to the border myself a couple times in Texas, at a couple different ports, and I've watched it myself. I mean, the last time I was down there was a few months ago. I was in El Paso, and I was literally down on the Rio Grande looking at Texas's concertina wire and Texas's efforts to try to secure the border. And in the couple hours I was down there, I personally probably watched 2 dozen people come across that border and run off into the brush or get picked up by somebody on the highway in El Paso and get hauled off. I mean, it's just the flow of illegals down there is staggering, and that's a power that lies squarely within the federal government. You go back to the U.S. Constitution, that's the executive's job. And unfortunately, we're in a position where states like Texas are having to step up and try to do that work. So,
Yeah, I mean, it's literally one of the only jobs enumerated to the federal government by the Constitution. Like
exactly.
literally one of the only ones is to protect the border and then secure like the country more generally speaking. That's literally I mean, aside from common currency, common defense is the next one, right? I mean, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, and look at it just from a national security standpoint. I mean, take the drugs out of it, which certainly is a national security. When you're talking about the cartels, you're talking about China providing a lot of the raw ingredients for the fentanyl. But let's just look at, the hundreds of known terrorists and terror watch lists individuals who have been apprehended. What about the ones that haven't?
Yeah, I mean, our current data is that right around well, the last number I heard, which was 2 months ago, it was right around 400. It was like 387 people on the terror watch list have been gotaways, meaning they have not been interdicted in any way by Border Patrol. They
Right.
just got into the country. 9/11 was
Right.
19 people plus some financiers, right? There's 380 at a minimum here.
Where are they? What are they doing? Who are they talking to? Who are they getting funded from? I mean, this is scary stuff. And this administration just turns a blind eye and is willing to sacrifice national security to try to win some votes and desperately keep themselves in power. And that's what's so sad about the entire situation. It's like, to me, like this is just flagrantly about staying in control and staying in power at the expense of
Yeah.
our state.
And it's even worse than like the 380 some or 400 people on the terror watch list. In addition to that, there's 140,000 people in the country right now who were granted asylum status who had derogatory reports on their immigration forms, meaning that they were involved in a terrorist organization or they had been convicted of a violent felony in their host country or something like that, right? 140,000 of them. ICE was instructed to let them into the country and monitor them. Some of them have ankle monitors. Some of them have home monitoring, meaning they have to call from their home phone from like once a week or once a day, depending on how it's adjudicated. And because of last week, actually, I got this news over the weekend. It's not been made public yet, but fuck it. Because of a budgeting screw up by the federal government, now none of these 140,000 people are being monitored anymore. Not one of them. That funding has dried up. It's a $700 million shortfall in the ICE budget and the immigration budget. So now these people are just out there doing whatever they want with no intent, certainly, to check in should they not have to. They won't, right?
Well, right. That's true, but we got to be careful about this one because why are they in the country to begin with?
Sure, I agree.
Right? I mean, the Biden administration loves to throw that one around. Like, well, I mean, Congress didn't fund us. They didn't give us the resources we needed to track these people. There was zero legal authority to let those people in the country to begin with. That was a violation of federal law. Federal immigration law is incredibly clear. It says every illegal detainee, or excuse me, every illegal alien shall be detained. Period. There is no mechanism in federal law that allows for a mass parole and mass migration. It doesn't exist. All the Secretary of Homeland Security, the only authority he has is on a case-by-case, individual basis. If there is a particular individual who's trying to get into the country and is legitimately seeking asylum, or if they have information about a criminal case, like we need them to testify. That's it. On a case-by-case, individual basis, the Secretary of Homeland Security can parole someone in, not thousands at a time. So, like, yeah, you got all these people out there who are not being monitored, and we can spin that and say, well, we need funding to cover that. I call BS on that. They
Mhm.
shouldn't have been let in the country in the first place. If you've been following the law and doing your job, those people wouldn't be here. But I mean that's what we've gotten from Alejandro Mayorkas. That's why I hate Washington D.C. I hate going there. I hate being there. But I went to Washington D.C. I went to Congress and I testified to support impeaching that guy because I think he's just absolutely abdicated his role and dereliction of duty to the country.
Yeah, he might be the worst cabinet secretary we've ever had of any kind, to be honest. Like, honestly, I don't know.
You ever watch that guy just sit in a hearing and do this?
Oh yeah, yeah. I think maybe he was dropped on his head when he was a child a bunch of times or something. He's not operating with a full deck. People hate him, by the way. Everybody in the Department of Homeland Security that I know literally hates this guy. So when I worked at immigration, he was the I believe he was the acting director of USCIS because he couldn't get confirmed by Congress, right? Which is pretty funny that he eventually became the DHS secretary. But yeah, he was the acting back then, and everybody hated him then. I mean, it got so bad that our entire intel. So I worked in FDNS, fraud detection and national security, and we stopped sending cases to ICE because they wouldn't prosecute them because they knew that the Ninth Circuit would just kick them down, like no matter
Yeah.
what we did, and create bad case law. So it completely logjammed the whole thing. As a matter of fact, this might be the worst group of cabinet secretaries ever assembled. It's like the reverse Avengers, basically, because Buttigieg went on paternity leave for 3 months while the world supply chain was falling apart. The dude wasn't anywhere to be heard from. I mean, it's insane. And then Blinken has been in charge of some of the most monumental fuck-ups in the history of our foreign policy, frankly, to include the Afghan pullout. For some reason, the Biden, I don't know if people really know this, but the Biden administration chose to put the Afghanistan withdrawal in the hands of the State Department instead of the military. You can make of that whatever you choose, right? I don't understand it. Nobody I've ever fucking served with or knows anything about the military understands it, but that's what they chose to do. And 13 people died as a result. And who knows how many members of the Afghan military who helped us, right, just got executed once we left. So,
Yeah.
so
No, I
I
mean,
don't think there's a more incompetent group of cabinet secretaries ever assembled.
well, and just keep going down the list. I mean, energy secretary, interior. You've got a gal in charge of the interior who's never had anything to do with it with natural resources in her life. You've got a person in charge of the Environmental Protection Agency who's from Montana. We know her very well here in Montana. Tracy Stone Manning. She was a tree spiker. She literally tried to kill, maim, and injure loggers in Montana when she was in college. She's admitted as much. And this is now who is in charge of our national forest policy or environmental policy in this country. I mean, this is just upside down world right now. But yeah, we can talk about Steve Dettelbach. We can talk about a lot of incompetent people, and just blatantly partisan people in these positions. And look, there's a lot of great employees within the federal system, right? Like I talked to the Border Patrol agents, not only in Texas, but there's a lot of them here in Montana. We've got a pretty big contingent of them on our northern border. Those people are patriots. Those are law enforcement professionals that want to do their job,
Yeah.
but they're quitting in mass. They're taking early retirement because they're just like, you know what? This is awful. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to be a tourist guide and to stamp someone's asylum claim and release them. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And that's pretty scary when you're talking about decimating the ranks of Customs and Border Patrol. But that's what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bunch of friends down there, and kudos to the ones who have stuck it out. To be honest, I don't know. That is the worst job in the country, in my opinion. Just the absolute worst job in the country right now. Being a cop is not. It's probably close second, to be honest. Yeah. So before we get out of here, we got a little bit of time left. I want to talk about some other stuff. So we're getting to this. We're getting to this inflection point in Western culture where, there in all things in nature, there's a balance. There's a struggle between two things, good and evil, yin yang. Some people call it. Even, a star struggles between nuclear fusion and gravity. That holds it together. Like this is true in every sense of the physical and sociological world. And right now, the West is kind of having to come to grips with the idea of liberty versus censorship to a lot of degrees, and not just censorship, but just outright oppression. And nowhere is it encapsulated more than the UK. So they've allowed the same thing we have, which is mass illegal immigration. And those illegal immigrants have done severe damage to their country and culture. There's no question about that. And people are getting angry about it. And it's one thing, like if somebody's going to go set buildings on fire, obviously you got to arrest them and do something about that. You can't let that happen. If they're going to flip police cars over, I don't support that either. But people who are talking shit on the internet, on Twitter, getting arrested in England right now, that's a bridge too far, right? Like we're starting with the thought police now, and it is completely unacceptable for a Western country to engage in that kind of activity. And make no mistake, they are trying to make it happen here in the United States. I don't know if you recall, I'm sure you do, the Governance Disinformation Board. Mayorkas tried to start a department inside of the Department of Homeland Security that would be responsible for monitoring subversive comments on the internet, right? That is thought police, right? So obviously the American community was like, no, fuck off, we're not doing that. Even people on the left, by the way, were like, no, we're not doing that. This woman now works for the British government, the woman that was in charge of it. She works for the British government doing the exact same job now. And look at what's happening. Cops are showing up to people's homes and saying, hey, that comment you made on Twitter, sorry, but you have to go to jail now, including the man whose child was stabbed by the immigrant. He is in jail right now, like literally in jail right now, not in prison, but he's in jail right now because of comments he made on the internet. Boy, one of the principles of this show is I will not sacrifice liberty for security. And we are in this mindset in the West now where our feelings get hurt pretty easy, and we want to lash out and use the legal system against people for that. And it's completely unacceptable. You as a I guess a legal expert and a legal authority, how do we, well, one, what are your thoughts on that? And two, how do we battle against this stuff?
Well, I mean, I come back to federalism. I mean, you brought it up earlier. I think rightly a lot of these things are going to get decided at the state level. Now, eventually, we probably end up with the U.S. Supreme Court with some of them because you're implicating the First Amendment. And I come back to, thank God we've got the justices that are appointed on the Supreme Court by Donald Trump that we did. I mean, these are some incredible legal scholars who are originalists. And I don't think they're going to take kindly to those kinds of things. But I'm a big believer in federalism. Federalism solves this. If your state has gone cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs and is going to be cracking down on things you're putting online while rioters are flipping over cop cars and injuring cops and burning down buildings, you need to leave and get to a state that's still got some sanity. Get to a Montana, get to a Texas, get to an Alabama. I mean, there are conservative laboratories of government that still exist, and that's what we have the right to move for. You don't have to stay in that situation. Yeah, I mean, it's a scary time right now. You know, you're watching what's going on in the UK, and they've been around a lot longer than we have, and generally friendly nations. But my word, they're quite upside down right now, and they're going down a dangerous road. As long as you've got AGs like me in place, we're going to keep fighting stuff like that. I absolutely, you have the right to say whatever you want. Where I start to get worried is when you have the platforms themselves starting to try to limit what you can say. And I mean that gets us into TikTok and China. And I mean, obviously I've been a big hawk on China since before my time in this office. But I mean, I think TikTok is a pretty flagrant Chinese spying and disinformation tool. But yeah, we have to have the right to free expression. But you know what? If you're in one of those crazy states that wants to give you a hard time for what you posted on Facebook, maybe it's time to leave.
Yeah, well, I mean, easy enough when you're leaving California to go to Florida or Texas or Montana. Not so easy when you're trying to immigrate to a new country, unfortunately. I think, what I really think is that whomever the next Department of Homeland Security secretary is should use the same rule we've been applying to Chinese immigrants and Latin American immigrants and North African and Middle Eastern immigrants to white European immigrants. right? People that not, and their whiteness has nothing to do with it, but Scottish people are white. That's just how it is. They're Scottish, right? I mean, I don't know, like it's, you're just using your eyes to see something. That isn't the judgment. Nobody fucking cares about that. Anyways. I think Europeans, we should give them the same asylum rules. Like, hey, your country is arresting you for stuff you're saying. That's not right. You come on over to America, right? That would be a move that I would support. As a matter of fact, I don't give a shit which country it's from or whether they're white or not, frankly. If somebody wants to, if they believe in what America is, that makes you American, in my opinion, right? I think Reagan in his farewell speech really nailed this. It's like, excuse me, you can move to Germany, but you'll never be German. You can move to France and you'll never be Frenchman. But if you can move to America and accept our ideals, and you will immediately be an American, right? And the ideals are that individual liberty and personal entrepreneurship are the ultimate inoculation to tyrannical bullshit. You accept that and live those ideals. Nobody cares who you pray to or who you love. Doesn't matter, right? Show up and work hard. The end. That's it. It's a very short list. It's a very easy thing to accomplish. You work hard and you respect other people's rights. The end, right? And then you can come hang out with us. I think that's a really good standard that we should set. And we should start accepting people based on that and not based on some other like toxic empathy or whatever we're using right now.
I mean, I couldn't have said that any better. That sounds like a congressional run to me, Dan.
Nah, no way. Nope. I've got a real job, bud. I wouldn't
Well, I hate to
last
wrap it
5
up on you,
minutes.
but I got to run here.
Yeah. So before you get out of here, I know you're a politician and all, so you gotta make the pitch. Make the pitch. Let's tell everybody where they can find you, where they can find more information about you and your upcoming campaigns and all that stuff.
Yeah, well, it's upcoming right now. So I'm up for re-election. We have the same terms, same term limits as the federal presidency. I mean, I did my first 4 years wrapping up here, running for a second 4 years. So elections in November, running for re-election right now. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it. My website is Austin for Montana, FOR, austin4montana.com. I'm running against a big trial lawyer. I mean, the trial lawyers in this state, they hate my guts, and they're throwing money at this guy. He's kind of a no name, but he's raising some money, and he is closing in the polls a little bit. I'm still quite a ways ahead, but TV time costs money. You know, we got the tester race going on right now, tester Sheehy race, and that is sucking up a lot of our oxygen. And you got a down ticket guy like me trying to compete with that. It costs money. So austin4montana.com is where you can find me.
Great. Well, thanks for coming today. I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for everything you do out there holding the federal government accountable and protecting your state, one that I'll probably move to eventually, so I appreciate it.
We will approve your visa. Come on in. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
It was fun.
Anytime. Thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.